Welcome to Podcash, the portable professional development podcast from CASH alumni. CASH alumni is the fastest growing association of professionals in care, health and education, and we're happy to have you here. This is where you'll hear from specialists and experts from across our network. Here's what's coming up.
A lot of the jobs in creative and digital that are asking with certainly the bigger companies, for example, a lot of those jobs are looking for degree level or even level 3, A-levels, B-Techs. And if you've been out of education, you're never going to get into that market unless somebody does something innovative and different. Obviously, we do.
Let's jump in to this week's episode.
We're a network organisation of training providers that deliver vocational and technical education all across Greater Manchester. And our members include independent training providers, FE colleges, universities, community providers, local authorities, and everything in between that. And we've been working in partnership with NCFE on our Inclusive Pathways Autism Support Project for 3 years now.
Thank you, Charlotte. And Seamus, if you can just introduce yourself.
I'm Seamus Mannion. I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Digital Advantag, DA, just in case I forget and I say DA all of a sudden. I'm an ex-teacher, so I'm liable to go into acronyms. I'm also founder of Code CIC. So DA is a charity. It was set up as a CIC back in 2018, but as a charity a few years later, and originally was founded to deliver training in schools primarily, but colleges as well. And the initial sort of project was a pop-up agency, which went to schools for 5 days a week, and later went into special schools for up to 10 days for the programme. And it was ideation of a business idea with a digital outcome or several digital outcomes. They found that it was really successful in a special college in Lancashire, and decided that maybe they needed a partner with background in special educational needs, or SEND. And so that's why Code originally. I went in to evaluate the programme in SEND schools around Manchester, and following that, Code, which was delivering education to people who were out of education, primarily autistic, but were really interested in digital. We partnered to eventually set up DISC, a college based in Manchester, Digital Independent Specialist College. And I think as a result of that, that's where we've got to this conversation now, because of some of our success stories with a couple of case studies.
Thank you, Seamus, and thank you for joining us, both of you. It's really, really good to be chatting about this. I know it's something that NCFE, GMLPN and Digital Advantag have worked on for a number of years. So really, in today's episode, we'll be looking at working through, I guess, the inclusive pathways that have been put together to support autistic individuals. Really looking at what the project goals were from the outset, what the achievements have been, what the challenges have been throughout as well, and then finally how that collaboration is shaping, I guess, better learning for learners. So just kicking things off, first of all, with just the very first question on a big picture view. Charlotte, can you just share with us just what the primary objectives of the project were and how it's important as well?
Starting off with why it's important, the Buckland Review of Autism Employment earlier this year states that only 3 in 10 autistic individuals are actually in work. And if you compare that against 5 in 10 of all disabled people and then 8 in 10 for non-disabled people, there's obviously a really big issue in terms of supporting those individuals into employment. And I think for us, we saw vocational pathways initially with our apprenticeships, but we've kind of widened that out. But what we saw with vocational pathways as a really supportive way that we could really support these individuals into the vocational pathways initially, but then progress them on to employment. The aims of the project initially was around working with training providers to develop a bespoke package of support to really support those autistic individuals into apprenticeship pathways. Initially, like I said, I think we found out pretty quickly that apprenticeships are great for some individuals, they're probably not right for all. And we definitely widened our view from that from quite early on, really, and looked at other pathways like supported internships and pre-employment programmes. The second aim was around informing training providers, employers and referral agencies, because we found that they needed support in supporting autistic individuals. I think there was a lack of confidence, a lack of maybe getting things right the first time. And I think we really recognised that. Third aim, is around providing an effective model and evidence base to really influence and inform the skills system. As a representative body of around 110 training providers, we can get evidence really that has massive impact and be able to utilise that and share it with key stakeholders. Another important thing for us within the project is making sure that those that didn't maybe have a diagnosis and those that didn't have an education healthcare plan represented, because I think from our initial research, there's so many barriers around potentially getting a diagnosis. Some people don't want a diagnosis, some people do, but they've been having to fight for it. The same with education healthcare plans. There's massive delays and challenges in getting them. So a really important part of our project was that we didn't state that they needed an education healthcare plan, and in some cases we even accepted self-diagnoses as a referral onto the project to make sure we was supporting those that needed the support.
Lots of objectives in there as well. I know I came in sort of the back end of it, but it's touched so many different areas. And I wonder, Seamus, just from a Digital Advantag, obviously award-winning charity, working with learners to provide work experiences, for all ages and abilities. What's been your role in the project, and do you see some of the challenges that Charlotte alluded to initially as well?
Definitely. DA's been member of the network for, I think, it's around 10 years, predated my time, but it's around 10 years. Andy, the CEO, has been involved, active member of the network. As I mentioned earlier, about the things that came out of some of the work that they were doing just within the SEND setting, particularly in the Lancashire and then later in the Manchester schools and other schools and colleges. We noticed there's a massive gap, and the agents, the pop-up agencies that I mentioned, the gap after Digital Advantag delivered that in a school or college setting was what next, which is probably one of the things that makes it such a strength of what we do at DISC now in the college. In that it was channel your enthusiasm and your skills into something for the future, but the education system wasn't set up to follow up with that. It was set up to get you to the end of a key stage and then kind of pay a bit of lip service to what happens next for you. We've been working with young people within DISC for the last 2 years, but that there was a predated supported internship that we partnered with Manchester College just coming out of lockdown, actually, which was a bit of a challenge. But one of the interns from that ended up becoming an apprentice, was referred to the internship by the network and became an apprentice for Stockport Council. So then there was a year where we didn't run the internship following that initial year, and then we ran that separately with Sencode as the education partner. And since then we've had sort of even more success, if you like, with a couple of people going on to be part-time employed in our digital agency, which is Sencode. We also have two of the guys from the original supported internship who weren't necessarily through the network but are also working with us now as well. So there's definitely progress if the support is right and the education system allows us to educate people in a way that meets their needs rather than the education system's needs.
That's a really big area as well, isn't it, in terms of that full education system piece. I mean, I know from my sort of background as a secondary maths teacher, you're right, like it's very focused on the secondary sort of area of it, and sort of the link between stages and education is definitely something that's really, really difficult in the UK. And often I think learners can get lost in that sort of process as they move through the age groups and transition to different experiences. I mean, in terms of sort of the project, obviously there's some really core objectives, but as a project manager, I'd be lying if I said all of my projects went seamlessly. Well, they weren't without challenges, so they all have hurdles of some way, shape or form. So Charlotte, sort of what were some of the issues that you came across in the project? What were the big barriers that sort of you faced throughout that?
Seamus kind of ended on it then. The biggest barrier, I think, is having to fit the individuals in the system we've got set up, whereas ideally you need the system to work with the individual. So I think that's definitely the biggest barrier. I think that's been something that's kind of been in a conversation throughout the life of the project, but I know it extends way further than just our autism project. What was a big learning curve for us was around the differences in barriers and challenges that each individual faced. No individual was even similar. They was all completely different. Some of them really complex, some of them not as complex, but they was all completely different. And I think, again, going back to that point about the education system and having to fit within that, it's really, really difficult. So we spent a lot of time really understanding what the individual needs were, what the individual barriers were, and really finding a provider and referring them on to a provider that would be best placed to support that. I think another barrier that we found was confidence in the education sector. Again, very similar to Seamus's point. I had so many phone calls with parents of individuals that were referred to the project. And there was, I think frustration is a really good word to use. I think they've had so many barriers put in front of them as a parent of an autistic individual that that lack of confidence in the education sector. And it's about, when you get them in the FE, you've then got to rebuild that, and that obviously takes a lot of time. That they really want their young person and their child to succeed, but there is that lack of trust in the system, and I think that's a really big barrier that probably we don't talk about enough.
Yeah, the point about each individual's different. They will have all had their own sort of set of circumstances and experiences to that point as well. What do you think is sort of contributing those challenges? So we've talked about like the systemic sort of issues there. I mean, is it sort of like funding? Is it time? Is it sort of this, experience between sort of various stages of education that's contributing, or is it a factor of sort of all those things?
I was going to say all of I don't know what you think, Seamus, but I'd say all of the above, plus probably more that we might not even know of.
I don't know if you ever see, forget the name of it now, but Sir Ken Robinson talked brilliantly about the education system, which was designed to get, people to work 9 to 5 and shove them in a factory and pull them out at the other end and pay them on a Friday. And that's how the education system's been set up, to fit in with that need. But the needs changed massively. You went to stay at home, but during lockdown, a lot of people succeeded at home who were Senko actually grew massively because of lockdown. And in spite of it, and one of the guys I mentioned earlier, who's an apprentice, was one of the first people we worked with, Dylan, and he's running our Get Autism campaign now. But it was people that time during lockdown, it was kind of natural for people who were not engaging with education because the system wasn't right for them and the environment wasn't right for them. It was natural for them to be able to do what they were doing at home. It was no biggie in some ways. So, we had real success with people wanting to work from home on the things that they were good at. Whereas I know that wasn't the case, in mainstream and across all education settings, but certainly with us. And even when lockdown continued and Manchester College and DA had trialled their supported internship for the year, lockdown allowed the young people, well, didn't allow, kind of enforced that partway through the year they had to start working from home, because that was the only way it was going to happen. And it was a natural way to do it. Because it's what it's like to work, isn't it? In the digital and creative, which is the sectors we're trying to get people into. So that really helps. I mean, we ended up having to, really think about, we set up as an addition to that, as DA and Senko set up a digital work hub where we kind of recognised that people weren't able to the young autistic people working with at the time weren't able to leave the home, certainly not every day, but if we could get them to come in once a week and then work from home a little bit at the time, that was an amazing way to do it for them, because it had just been educational. Said, no, you've got to come in. There's no bending on that. So, about thinking about what we actually need at the moment for the workplace is probably a better way to set off than what we needed 200 years ago, or 100 years ago, even whenever we did our most recent reevaluation of education, rather than the tinkering we do every time there's an election. That was very topical, wasn't it? Bringing us back to it.
I know it. What I think the message in that was coming out, it's that individuality, and it sometimes being in a classroom setting is absolutely amazing for one individual, but it's not going to be right for everyone. So if there is some flex, and COVID obviously, like you said, forced us to kind of think like that a little bit, but it's actually give a lot of good practice that a lot of providers, including yourself, have continued with, and it's really helped those individuals that don't necessarily thrive in that face-to-face classroom 9 to 5 every single day session.
Introducing Cash Alumni Plus membership, your passport to exclusive features and professional development opportunities. You can now choose to elevate your membership experience and enjoy a host of enhanced benefits, including a brand new comprehensive library of e-learning modules and cashback discounts worth up to an average of £329 in savings per year. Expand your circle, exchange ideas, and stay ahead of industry developments with access to networking events both online and in person. Plus, with access to employment and career guidance sessions, you can confidently navigate your career path with personalised advice and job opportunities tailored just for you. Upgrade to Cash Alumni Plus membership for only £25 per year to access all these features and more. Head over to your member homepage or use the Join Us link in the show notes for this episode to find out more.
It definitely has sort of challenged the status quo, hasn't it, COVID? But some things have sort of slipped back into sort of that normal pattern again, particularly when you look at sort of the school system. On that element of things, is it when someone comes into the internship or, is looking to work with DA, is it a case of, taking the time to really understand that individual, their sort of best ways of working? How do you overcome some of those, I guess, obstacles of that and, needing to deliver, I guess, a program as well?
Yeah, it's obviously, it has to be really individualised because we're judged by Ofsted on the outcomes in their education, health and care plans. Because as things stand in the college, everybody has an education, health and care plan. We are part of a pilot with Manchester City Council and the DFE to do or provide a similar service and pathway for some people with, say, a diagnosis of autism or another disability, and to provide them with a similar supported internship experience. But predominantly, we don't, that's not all we do, but we're tied by the outcomes in the EHCP being looked at by Ofsted, obviously. But what's most important to us is what the young person and that parent wants, because something I meant to say earlier, Charlotte, when you were referring to the number of people number of parents and their carers who've had a real struggle to get people into even our place, it's around 2/3 of people at secondary, parents at secondary age are just totally unhappy with the setting that their young person's in. And so
that's a massive amount of people, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm talking just about people with autistic children.
Mm-hmm.
That's a huge amount of people across the country that are really struggling. And we see that all the time when parents come to us. So we'll have open evenings, or, people get in touch, like some people you've referred to the network, Charlotte. But, I'm saying the network because I get my letters the wrong way around.
GMLPN, that's not what
that. I thought I should just try and say. I thought, no, I'll get it wrong. But yeah, so we get parents coming to us who are desperate and have had such a bad experience. You know what? On top of, and I don't mean this in a disrespectful way, on top of the challenges of finding out you've got a young person who's got a disability, and then, and the system's set up to actually support them, but it isn't. It's just the paperwork around it, or the laws are set up behind it, but there's no system or process in place properly to make sure you get what you need. Some local authorities are easier to deal with than others in terms of that, but, nobody's easy to deal with.
It's not an easy process across the board, is it?
Part of it's funding, part of it's systemic, but either way, it's just a real challenge, and some of the parents are on the knees by the time they come and find us. The outcomes for those young people are going to be delayed because, as I said earlier, not most, but 50% of our guys have been out of education in some format. Maybe they've been homeschooled, maybe they've been what in old money they used to call school refusers, but, young people who have had a significant portion of the last few years out of education, and even more so since lockdown. So, they're already on a back foot trying to catch up. And then a lot of the jobs, say, in creative and digital, that are asking with certainly the bigger companies, for example, a lot of those jobs are looking for degree level. If you've been out of or even level 3, A-levels, BTECs. And if you've been out of education, you're not going to be got those, so you're never going to get into that market unless somebody does something innovative and different. Obviously, we do, because I won't be here otherwise.
I'm going to say the work experience element of that as well. There's so many job adverts out there that says you need experience, experience or whatever it may be, but definitely through the agency you've got, Seamus, that again provides that opportunity that they might not have had in the past.
For us as well, like I mentioned earlier, working to your key stage in whatever setting you're in, we educate. We've got 40 learners this year, 34 at the moment. Hopefully 40 in September we're looking at, but we can't employ 40 people every year going forwards in the creative and digital. So we need a different way of thinking from big employers. A couple of examples that would be useful to know about with that are, obviously, I mentioned Stockport Council before employed one of our young people as part of the agency, which was the DA agency at the time, to create content, and was doing an apprenticeship in that. So that was a supported pathway. The apprenticeship didn't quite work out as, I think the changes in apprenticeships are better now for some of the guys we work with. You've got a couple of the guys that were like a level 3, couldn't do a content creation type apprenticeship unless it was a degree apprenticeship then. So that caused a barrier for some of our guys, but one of them, who's all over Manchester City Council's local offer website, because they designed the branding for it, I should say. They decided they wanted to employ that young person as a paid intern within the agency, within Sencode. And so they've been working since September last year, developing content for the local authority, but are in a safe, supportive environment that they're familiar with people they're familiar. And so we try to grow that sort of model to allow other people coming through the college to do the same from next year, from this year, from this September. One of them is one of the guys that was referred by Greater Manchester Learning Provider Network. So I've released, got it out there. And so One of them is now has been working, so had a post-internship, did the sports internship, but due to difficulties wasn't able to take on an apprenticeship. Applied for several, but because of non-inclusive practices in the application and interview process, wasn't able to get any of them. And that wasn't going to change because they were massive employers that weren't going to be able to change. So we took that person on as a freelancer, as a self-employed, which is real. The gig economy is kind of huge for a lot of creative companies. So we took them on for a day a week, had a little bit more education 2 days a week within the college setting, and is now going to be working 3 days a week. Doesn't want to work more than 3 days a week, by the way. Is happy to have their own time. But that person, again, referred through the network as initially struggled with travelling in, coming from quite far out in Greater Manchester, all the way in, now comes in independently, had difficulties communicating initially, and now communicates with everybody in the team really brilliantly, and if isn't able to communicate with speech, communicates in other ways. And that's part of what we've encouraged them to do to make sure they felt safe. Not every big employer or even small employer can do that, but that's what we're built on the ground up, to meet their needs first and then get the work in afterwards. I'm not sure that's a business plan, meet their needs first and get the business in afterwards, but seems to be working all right for now.
Works well for you anyway, so stick with it, I would say.
It seems the right way to do it in education, to be fair, doesn't it? Putting their needs first, and everything else will follow. So no, that sounds really, it's amazing, to be fair, and it's a really, really good success story, and shows the impact that DA are having in the space, as well as obviously then GMLPN as well, in terms of that network. Charlotte, from sort of your perspective, what have been sort of the highlights for you?
One of the important things was the fact we didn't want to duplicate offers that were already out there, and we said we worded it really loosely, like a bespoke package of support, and that could be literally going to Digital Advantag and the college at DISC and saying, actually, you've got a really great programme already that is already established. Can this individual be referred on to? We had others where, again, they didn't necessarily have a package of support that they could easily kind of fit into, and some providers created them. So it was about, again, back to that individuality, but not duplicating offers that already existed, because there is some really, really amazing practice happening in Greater Manchester and wider. So we didn't want to come in and say, actually, no, do it the way we were saying that you have to do it. We wanted to wanted the people that were doing the great work to just get on and do it with support from us. We set up a project steering group. Again, we knew we didn't have all the answers. We wasn't necessarily an autism expert, if that exists, but we was able to bring key players around the table to really help discuss and shape the project. So that included providers such as Digital Advantag and others, but also DFE were involved, the Institute for Apprenticeships were involved, National Autistic Society was involved. So again, just making sure that it wasn't just GMLPN going off on a tangent saying this is what we think we should be doing. It was very collaborative, and I think that collaborative approach really helps the project and succeed. And like I said, not duplicating offers that already existed was another thing that we definitely did want to do. We was able to, I mentioned getting that evidence base earlier on, and I think one of the things that we're really proud of is we got an evidence base from the project and around reasonable adjustments and endpoint assessment, specifically within apprenticeship. We shared that with the Institute for Apprenticeships, and they was able to use that when they was updating their reasonable adjustments guidance. So again, we was helping shape what is actually happening in terms of that policy and education system. The creation of resources, which I'll hold and I will come to in a little bit more detail, but I think just the impact on individuals. I don't know if you see me, I was really smiling when Seamus was talking about one of the individuals, because I know who he was talking about, and I think the impact that it's not that our project is not necessarily the impact that the providers that we're working with, I think it is just the biggest achievement for us. And I think we couldn't have done it without having great providers like Digital Advantag and others on board to really support us. It's
difficult bringing all those stakeholders together as well, isn't it? And it is sort of that unknown a little bit initially when you are bringing everyone together to get views on a subject that, we've talked about faces so many, an area that faces so many challenges, etc. as well. But it's really positive that there's been that real buy-in from different groups, different areas within education, seeing multiple, obviously, networks working together as well, which is really, really good. I am going to ask you a little bit, because it ties in sort of to your answer to that, in terms of the toolkits that you mentioned and putting together, I guess, some support and resources for wider stakeholders. So can you just tell us a little bit about them and how you went about developing them, what your hopes are for them as well?
So when we first started on the project, so that was just around 3 years ago now, we started looking at what CPD, what resources, what kind of training and support was available for training providers initially, but also referral agents and employers. And there's a lot out there. And again, we didn't want to duplicate anything that was already there, but we thought people in education are time poor, in all honesty. They've not got time to sit and search Google for the answer that they're looking for. So that kind of started our thinking around the resources and toolkits that we wanted to create. Again, coming back to that, not duplicating. We didn't want to duplicate there's some fab training out there already. There's some really fab resources. But how can we bring them together as a project? And that's where the toolkits were kind of born from. So we've got 3 toolkits that are live on the Cash Alumni platform, and that's one for training providers, one for referral agencies, and one for employers. And they contain some like top tips, resources, links to training, and again, they were all shared through the groups that we brought together. So it's not just, again, GMLPN wasn't just saying this is what we think you should be looking at. It came from feedback from our partners. The toolkits were great and there was a great first step. Then we kind of added value to that and kind of maximised what was in it and created the Cash Alumni community, and that still sits on the Cash Alumni platform now. They've got some really good kind of blogs, some articles, again, some additional links to training. They've got some video case studies and just really adding value to what was in the toolkit. And then kind of within this last year of the project, what we thought was actually there probably is a little bit of a gap in the market for some CPD, and we obviously consulted with the steering group and our wider partners, but what we did was created an online CPD module that's free to access for training providers. Again, bringing together some of the need-to-know bits when you first start supporting an autistic individual. And that's not us saying this is the only training you would need to do. The way we pitched it is it's a high-level overview of things you should be aware of when you are supporting an autistic individual, and that may be for the first time, or maybe actually you support quite a lot and maybe you just want to refresh your training. But the CPD's got loads of modules, it's interactive, it's online, it's kind of work through yourself as opposed to like an online video session. And it's got things such as colour clearing conditions, how to empower individuals, practical guidance, and we've got some really great case studies from training providers that were involved in the project, looking at those strength-based approaches, a little bit about funding and funding that is available to support autistic individuals, but also funding that they can access through like access to work and funding that employers can access as well. And again, really looking at those vocational pathways and having the case studies from the providers that are involved in the project, including Digital Advantag, I think really bring that the CPD and the toolkits and the resources on Cash Alumni to life.
We've got a lot of obviously practitioners that'll be listening to the podcast, and that's certainly something where, you know, we encourage you to go and access that and have a little look at that as well in the accompanying resources there.
Introducing Cash Alumni Plus membership, your passport to exclusive features and professional development opportunities. You can now choose to elevate your membership experience and enjoy a host of enhanced benefits, including a brand new comprehensive library of e-learning modules and cashback discounts worth up to an average of £329 in savings per year. Expand your circle, exchange ideas, and stay ahead of industry developments with access to networking events both online and in person. Plus, with access to employment and career guidance sessions, you can confidently navigate your career path with personalised advice and job opportunities tailored just for you. Upgrade to Cash Alumni Plus membership for only £25 per year to access all these features and more. Head over to your member homepage or use the Join Us link in the show notes for this episode to find out more.
Keen to bring it back to you, Seamus, just, you know, from your experience of working within a sort of provider setting as well. I mean, for the practitioners that are listening to the call and perhaps, you know, have varying level of experience within this space, I mean, what sort of like the best piece of advice you could possibly give, or even sort of steer it to certain areas there?
I think there's a few things on what Charlotte said. The single best piece of advice, I forget who said it, but if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. Everybody's an individual. Don't expect that the first autistic person you meet you'll need to speak to them or communicate with them or whatever interactions you have with them in the same way as the next autistic person you'll meet. The biggest thing I would say to the learning providers is, I don't mean in a bad way at all, but something we've discovered as we've grown as a college to, I think we've got maybe 12, 15, something like that, somewhere around there in terms of staffing in the college, how many neurodivergent staff we've got, because everybody in the college who's a student or an intern is neurodivergent, the more things people are reading in terms of some of the resources you mentioned there, Charlotte, as well, are reading up for their own knowledge about the young people they're working with, the more they're going, oh, do you know what? I'm thinking, actually, I've been thinking this for ages about myself. Maybe I need to think about. So, we've had a few people who've gone through the GP for a referral to get diagnosis on various things, various conditions that probably wouldn't have known about if they hadn't have seen those resources or worked in the college as it is. So don't forget about your staff is one thing with the learning providers, that they will all have their needs. 20% of people have some form of neurodiversity, neurodivergence, I should say. Make sure that your staff, obviously, you consider your staff's needs in terms of that neurodiversity, and specifically autism, obviously. But the thing that I'd sort of like to, maybe the learning providers aren't the ones I'd be wanting to do the most work with. It'd be the employers, and some resources on there are really useful, particularly the law, like the Equality Act, because there's so many organisations out there that are inclusive, that at least they've ticked the relevant boxes to prove that they're inclusive. But from the experience of people we've had go for interview with them, they're definitely not. So they need to maybe look at themselves a little bit and look at those resources to guide them a little bit better, because they are breaking the law and quite often not meeting needs, even at the point of application, never mind whether they're working for you or not. That sounds a little bit negative, but that's just our experience.
It's the reality, and I think that there is the reality is. And just to agree, I think employers are, we've aimed this DPD at training providers to kind of empower them with the tools to then be able to support employers, because I agree, I think employers are the key here, really. Is providers are realistically only with them for a really short space of time. They may come back and do other things, but employers are where these individuals are going to spend most of their employed time. So I think them getting it right is key.
Hopefully the resources and the work that we're doing will go a long way to supporting with that awareness as well, and building that understanding to what are the sort of future plans of this work, where do you sort of see it going next, but also sort of longer term. And we've spoken about the challenges, not just within the project, but sort of wider than that as well. So, what would you love to see change in the system as well?
It's about continuing that conversation. I think for us, the project technically ends next month it, isn't it? And Digital Ag. But we don't just want to leave it there. We want to continue the conversation, and whether it's it won't be in the same structure as the project, but making sure that we are continuing the conversation with the partners we've brought on board in terms of providers, but also the SEIFE, National Autistic Society, and really there's a lot to be done, as we've kind of referenced and alluded to throughout. There's a lot that is happening that is really positive, but there is a lot more to be done. So yeah, I think for me it's continuing that conversation, whatever it may look like post-project, but yeah, continuing that.
And Seamus, just from your view, I mean, not just on the project, but sort of the work that you do in day in, day out. I think you alluded to it before that, you've got 40 internships within sort of DA at the minute, and you want to see those bigger employers take, more learners on and support with that as well. Is that one of the key things that you'd like to see, and sort of what else would you like to see sort of within the system change?
So we've got two elements. Obviously, we've got the college side of things, and then we've got the agency, the digital agency, both of them working hand in hand with something that might sort of follow up. Doesn't encompass everything you've done over the past 3 years, Charlotte, but the I Get Autism campaign, which getautism.uk if you need it. Just it's a good plug. Yeah, we're not done t-shirts to sell yet, but anyway, you get. So we've got one of the guys who came through the college is running one of our apprentices is running a campaign to enlighten employers as to how they can actually, you mentioned access to work earlier. We use access to work support. So we don't, the individuals who work within our organisations use access to work funding to help them get the relevant support they need, whether that's assistive technology or a job coach or a job aid. We're using that, and we getting that story out there because there's a massive amount of funding potentially for businesses to be able to use to help them be more inclusive. I think for smaller businesses, which is where we find the difficulty, most of the creative and digital jobs are in SMEs, which maybe don't have enough staff to be able to sort of say, right, your role is to make sure that we get the access to work funding in place. Then you find a job coach and that, because they're designing a website or something else, they haven't got time to do that on top. And so because they're small, they need that support, which is why leads on to us doing it for them by having our own agency. which we're hoping to grow. We're looking at Greater Manchester and the North, the rest of the North, predominantly the Northwest initially. So that's where our links are. But, to have a second base for college, so another disc, but also, a second Sencode, because they're both co-located, which didn't say at the start, but it's the same journey through for someone. So if you're starting in our pre-internship in year 1, you might have 3 years in the college and then 1 or 2 years in a supportive working environment, which hopefully gives you the next step to be able to go out into, a big work environment. That's what we're hoping, which is in a business plan. It's not just off the top of my head.
There's been lots that we've touched on there. I mean, Charlotte, from your perspective, if any of the listeners want, take away something from the discussion and sort of follow up from it, what would be the best way of doing that with GMLPN?
Well, the first step would be looking on the Cash Alumni. I'll copy Seamus and do a plug. The Cash Alumni Inclusive Pathways community, that's definitely the first step. But just get in touch. Like I said, the project will be ended very soon, but we as a network really want to continue the conversation. So definitely just reach out, and I'll make sure my details now will sit on the Cash Alumni community, and then you can kind of reach out that way. But there's so much more we can do as a collective of partners interested in kind of changing the system, probably the best way to describe it. Another thing that we probably could get better at as a sector is really shouting about the great work that is going on. As I mentioned, we didn't want to duplicate, and we really wanted to work collaboratively, but there is some amazing practice that's taking place in Greater Manchester, in the Northwest, nationally, but let's shout about it a hell of a lot more, whether it's case studies of employers doing something really different and great, or case studies of individuals that have really progressed in whatever vocational pathway it is, or providers that are doing some really great stuff. Let's shout more about what we are doing as a sector, I would say.
And same question, Seamus. Obviously, we heard about the campaign, sort of what's next obviously, for Digital Advantage, and what's in that business plan. Where can people go to find out more and get in touch about that?
Do I get 2 plugs to Charlotte's one then?
Yeah, you can have I'll let you.
I said it, Morty.
You don't tell them it.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so for the college, the website's disc.ac.uk. DISC as DISC, and the agency is Sencode, all one word, .org. Go and have a look at those websites. In terms of our next steps with the agency, it's if there's any providers out there who are interested in, something innovative or not even providers, employers as well, but anyone, something innovative to help with I'm not sure what the social budgets, what's it? Social responsibility corporate. So it's wasn't it? There's a different one now, but the CSR with a different buzz term. But yeah, if anyone, we have inclusion by design, through design, whatever way you want to call it, with our design agency. So yeah, if you want to get involved and help us out with that.
Thank you very much, Charlotte and Seamus. And thank you everyone for listening to the podcast as well. We're hoping to see you next time. You can find out lots more about the project on our webpage, as well as obviously that existing content on Cash Alumni. And as Charlotte and Seamus have said already, there's plenty of spaces to get involved if you are interested in continuing this conversation moving forward. So thank you very much, everyone, and see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Podcash. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe on your podcast app so you never miss an episode. You can also watch many of these conversations by heading over to cashalumni.org.uk and going to the CPD and best practice section of the site. That's cashalumni.org.uk.